Welcome to Food, Wine, and Whiskey, a podcast about having fun conversations on tasty dishes, vinos, and spirits from around the world. Rob is your host. He is an avid home chef, WSET Level 2 award in wine, and a whiskey drinker and collector. Time to set the table. Here's Rob.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. Talking coffee today, and my guest, been on several times, but not for a little while. Chris Francis. Chris, good to have you back, buddy.
It's good to be back. It's been a while.
And I consider you one of my coffee buddies. You know, you're somebody, there's a few of us that know each other that are, I say, truly into coffee, whatever that means. We can define that how we define it, but I think, into grinding your own beans, into buying quality beans, into having good brewers, maybe multiple brewers, things like
doing research.
We're a nerd.
Exactly.
We're coffee geeks. We're coffee nerds.
Yep, getting into the science of it.
Yeah, the science of it. And it's worth the journey, in my opinion. If you're into coffee at all, if you drink it just for the effect, I think learning to drink to appreciate it is something you should explore.
It's similar to any kind of thing, right? Wine and even whiskey. Right?
Yeah,
there's one thing of drinking it for the effect, right? In case of alcohol, drunk.
Yeah.
And then to learn about it and to get the subtle flavors and everything else.
And I think we all kind of started that way with alcohol, hey, when we were younger.
It's true.
It was for effect. Yeah. But as we get older, and I'm impressed with young people today because when I was younger, I'm in my mid-50s, it was only effect. There was never even, there was no curiosity about what is this spirit actually about?
Nope.
How's it made? How's it,
what's
created?
What's the cheapest and the strongest?
Yeah, and how quickly can I get where I want to go? And no more. I don't think I've been drunk in a very, very long time, probably been decades. I drink now because I enjoy what I'm drinking, the experience of what I'm drinking. And in the last few years, coffee's kind of fallen into that.
I agree.
Yeah. Sure. What's your coffee journey? How did you get into coffee and get down this rabbit hole, so to speak? I'll get into how I did it, but I'm curious how you got there.
Well, growing up, my grandparents always had just the, Folgers red tin.
Yeah.
Right? And, growing up, I would have a cup every now and then, but it had to be with milk and sugar.
Yeah.
And fast forward into college, I just, grabbing a quick cup. I didn't have milk or sugar available at the time. I just started sipping on it and started getting into more of the roasty flavor.
Was this the same coffee, though?
No, it's just whatever was available at the college or at the cafe there on site.
Okay. So they were doing kind of a Starbucks type of pour over or whatever, a specialty brew, if we will.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And then, as I started getting into the whole K-Cup thing, which, back in the mid-2000s was
the Keurig was huge. Yeah.
Exactly. Started going to some of these little K-Cup shops that, you could build your own mixed variety box. So you just like different flavor profiles. Obviously, they were artificially flavored, but got into more of that. And then really started watching, I guess, James Hoffman on YouTube and learning all, the not really secrets, but the behind the scenes of, coffee origins and how to brew a good cup of coffee, and then just started experimenting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a similar journey to all of us who are where we are now. We down that rabbit hole, because for me it was Tyler Martin, who here in town, and we recorded an episode a few years ago, and he was like, "Hey, you drink coffee. You're big into wine. You're big into spirits. You're big into other stuff, but you're drinking shit coffee." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" And he's like, let's have a little episode on coffee. Let me expose you to what coffee can really be." And at that time, I remember the first question he asked me, it was like, "How do you make your coffee?" And I go, "Well, I got this scooper and I take 6 scoops of this for 12 cups of coffee." And he's like, "Yeah, that's your first mistake. Yep. Scoops is not a official measurement." Yeah. It can be so different. And, when he started talking to me about the actual science of coffee, how you actually get to a good cup, it blew me away because, all I'd ever had was that, to your point, the Folgers, plastic tin, whatever, the Maxwell House, I remember the old commercial. I'm trying to remember the little jingle they had for Maxwell House about.
I forget Maxwell House, but obviously Folgers is, Folgers in your cup. Yeah.
And so Tyler came out and we went through a whole cupping, and he showed me, grinding and all that. Man, it blew me away to go, because at that point I was drinking coffee and I would drink it as close to black as I could. But when you're buying coffee pre-ground at a grocery store, it's usually not quality beans that they're making this type of coffee with, and it's bitter, and so you have to have something in there. And I'd be putting a splash of cream in the bottom just to cover the bottom, just to take away some of that bitterness. But to be able now to enjoy the different flavors of coffee black, and the bean itself is what expresses what you're going to get in the cup. And you can change it a little bit based on grind size, based on water temperature, based on water to coffee ratios, all this different. It makes coffee fun, and it makes it way more enjoyable.
Well, I mean, to that effect, buying these pre-ground bags in the grocery store, I mean, who knows how old or how long they were sitting there before they even made it to the bag.
Yeah.
They could be stale for all you know. You don't know until you had actually, ground your own coffee at home.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Some folks might be listening to this, and I think it's a good time to make this suggestion, recommendation. Even, we're saying, I would say it this way, don't buy pre-ground coffee, period.
Ever.
Don't ever buy pre-ground coffee. And when you go to the grocery store or whatever store you might have that you go, well, they have whole beans in a bag, or they have, sometimes you'll see in our stores around here, they have this big plastic bin that you pour the lever and you can fill it up into a bag. Don't buy those coffees either. I mean, those beans, you don't know how long they've been there, to your point. And what I would say is when you're at the grocery store and you see these whole beans in a bag, try to find on that bag a roast date. That's one of the most important things when you get into coffee, freshness, because that's where you still have the flavors that you want to get in that bean. Roast date is a critical piece of information to have to be able to know that you're getting fresh, quality coffee.
Correct. If not, like I said, it's going to be stale.
Yeah.
And you're losing a lot of flavor.
You can still drink it. It's probably going to be all right. But, you might go, well, this isn't very good. And it's probably not the fault of the bean itself. It's probably more the age. It's just, it's dead. It's lost everything.
And the type of bean. Because, what is it? The main ones we drink are what? Arabica?
Arabica.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And what's the other one that?
Robusta.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Which Robusta is more of it's not thought to, you can get good coffee with it, but it's very rare.
Right.
Arabica, you can get bad coffee with it, but it's very rare. One of the things for me is coffee shops. When you start getting into coffee, Chris, and you want to make a good cup of coffee at home, you absolutely can. But I think the journey for most people is, I want to get into coffee, and I think I'm going to start by going to a coffee shop. Do you have some rules? Do you have some guidelines, some thoughts? If I'm looking for a shop, when you walk into a shop, are there some things in the shop that kind of scream to you that pretty confident I'm going to get a good cup of coffee here?
I think so. Obviously, you go to a coffee shop, you expect to see your generic espresso machine. Any coffee shop should have an espresso machine.
Yeah.
But I think coffee shops that are there not just to obviously, do the mass market espresso sugary drinks, but also to serve a good cup of coffee would be probably to have some kind of pour over setup, right?
That's the bingo for me, is to see that. One, if I ask you, can you do a pour over, you say yes. And then I can follow up with, what kind of brewer are you using? And if they look at me like, have no idea, then I get a little nervous. Right. But I think the first point you made, having a pour over option is critical, because I go to a lot of places. Starbucks is one of them now. They don't do a pour over.
No,
they make these big batches of coffee that go into a big metal container that when you order your coffee, it's just, pour it in a cup and there you go.
Exactly. That's their game plan, though. They hit the drive-through, you get your sugary drink and go.
Yeah. And there's a place for Starbucks. They were great back in the day.
Correct.
But they've gotten so big. I was watching a YouTube video, a cooking show that I like, and a guy was talking about this Italian sandwich place. It's kind of like a focaccia bread. I forgot what he called it. It's another version of focaccia. They make this sandwich in Italy that's become super popular. And it's got, mortadella on it. It's got this kind of the inside of burrata, that kind of cheese where you make this creamy kind of cheese on there with a pistachio and
I actually watched that video last night.
Did you really? It's
the guy with
not
the
your
bandana.
average cooking show.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And he was talking about how this sandwich became so popular in Italy, this little street in Florence.
Yep.
Never had any traffic, and then these little sandwich shops became very popular. And now that street is filled, and he's opened up these same sandwich shops in New York and Vegas and California. And his point was, it's no longer as good as it used to be. They can't
keep the quality.
Yeah, they can't keep the quality because the demand, they just got to blow and go.
Yep.
And, it made me think that can happen to a lot of things. You get this reputation of being really, really good, and you lose the quality to people who know what it should be.
Yep.
Us being coffee guys. But people getting into it for the first time, that's still the bar. That's the
threshold.
That's where they're entering, and they go, this is great. When really, we can get you to a place where you're going to go, okay.
It's a whole nother level.
It's a whole nother level.
Yep.
And I think coffee's that way. I think Starbucks and Pete's Coffee, and even, in our world today, coffee shops, we're talking about like everything, food and wine. You want to know where it's from. You want quality. You want specialty. Coffee is a big, nomenclature. Now we hear it's a specialty origin. It's a single origin specialty coffee. You want that. You want to know that. But because it's so popular, I see shops. When me and Sandra have traveled, I see shops opening up. I'll walk in and they go, we're a coffee shop. And their pour over is a knockoff of a Chemex with a wire mesh, coffee brewer. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't expect to get a good cup of coffee.
But obviously there's some kind of balance, right? There's the whole triangle. What is it? Price, quality, and speed, right?
Oh, is it? Okay, I don't know this one.
Well, it's just, like a business model, right? I mean, you can only pick two of those options.
Okay, yeah. I see where you're going.
If something's fast, and costs less, or costs more, I mean, the quality should be higher.
Yes.
It's just, I guess if you go into a coffee shop, you can't have 10 people order a pour over and get the coffee turned around in 5 minutes.
No, and you're going to have multiple brewers, multiple people just doing that, because each of those, to your point, I get what you're saying, 5 minutes at a minimum for each of those coffees.
Exactly.
I like that. The quality, speed, and price.
Yep.
So if you're going to have quality and speed, price is going to be a lot higher.
Exactly.
If you're going to have quality and price,
the speed's going to be a lot
slower.
Exactly.
But we just said if you're going to have quality and speed, price is going to be higher. Gets a little confusing.
It does.
Yeah. But I like where you're going with that, because you have to pick where's my sweet spot. And I think the point you're making is...
What's the detriment?
Yeah. The point you're making, when you get so big and you have the masses that are wanting to be served, if you don't serve them in a timely way, they're going to go somewhere else. Exactly. So you sacrifice a bit of the standards maybe you had when you first started out to make sure that you get...
But to be honest, I mean, this is more of a boutique kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
what's your favorite part of making coffee? I mean, it is part of the making of your cups of coffee in the morning when you grind and brew and do all this. Is that part of the enjoyment of coffee, or is it just knowing that I'm having a quality beverage in the glass when I'm done? I don't care about the process. I'm just looking for the result.
No, it's 100%. It's part of the process.
I agree.
Being able to grind your own beans and just the aroma from grinding itself, right? Yeah. Especially in the morning. It's just part of the ritual. It's a ritual.
And the process.
Yep.
Are you still doing a hand grinder?
All the time.
Yeah.
Hand grinding.
Hand grind, and you use the 1Z Presso K-Max?
That's all. I just use the AeroPress.
But for the grinder, the K-Max.
Correct.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, which is a great grinder. I mean, you can get like almost 40 grams of coffee in there.
I do.
If you're brewing for somebody else or a large pot, it works great. I agree with you. I think the process of making a cup of coffee at home, one, I think everybody in the kitchen, on a weekend, or if you have family in town, you're making a pot of coffee. Everybody, I mean, my wife doesn't drink coffee, but she loves the aroma in the kitchen of coffee. So I think that most people do.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to tobacco or cigars, right? I mean, I know plenty of people who don't even want to touch a cigar or smoke anything, but they enjoy the smell of like a pipe tobacco or a cigar.
Yeah, for sure, because it is a good smell.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that the process to me is It's almost therapeutic, man. It's almost relaxing to me. I can get up in the morning and I know I've got, 10 minutes to make a cup of coffee. That is just, it helps me just kind of.
I think it's part of the human, I guess, not just thought process, but just being human. Because if you go back to even like China or Japan, I mean, they have tea ceremonies.
Sure.
The entire process to make tea is part of the ritual. It's a ritual.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a very.
They have entire like tea boards where you have to, get your loose leaf tea and pour water through the board and everything else. It's a ritual.
You're mentioning some Asian countries, but I would also say the English. The way they do their tea.
Well, back in the day, even here in America, they had, and in England, they had coffee shops.
Yeah.
Instead of bars, like, men were getting in trouble with their wives because they spent too much time in the coffee shop.
That's a good point. I remember that with my grandfather.
Yeah. See?
Yeah. Go meet your buddies in town in the mornings for a cup of joe.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the things, obviously the process. So let's talk about some of the things in making a great cup of coffee. Roasters, coffee being, one of the key things. There's multiple things here that you have to make a good cup of coffee. Obviously, good coffee, you have to have a good grinder. I mean, you really have to have a good grinder. Grinder is probably the most important thing. You have to have a scale, you have to have a brewer, and you have to have a way to get, water hot into the cup. Right. Let's talk about the coffee first. I mean, you and I love exploring different roasters. It's kind of like, the world of wine. Mm-hmm. You can, you might say, I like Cabernet Sauvignon, that grape.
You're like, okay,
it's
but where?
Different. Yeah, it's different from Napa than it is from Bordeaux or from Australia or from Chile. And so exploring and seeing how that particular grape can be made different ways, coffee is very similar. I mean,
coffee, it's a fruit. It's a seed of a fruit. It's the internals of fruit.
Yeah, but a little cherries. The seed of a cherry. You get 2 seeds per cherry.
Yep.
So 2 beans. They only call it a bean because it looks like a bean.
Exactly.
It's a seed.
It's a seed from a cherry, a different cherry.
And it's green when you get it. It doesn't change color until you roast it.
And like I said, origin matters because at the end, how they process it matters.
Yeah. And if you had, let's just name 4 or 5 of our top countries that make coffee that we enjoy drinking from. I think your first would be
Ethiopia
is your first one.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ethiopia. I've become a huge fan of coffee that I can get from roasters from Mexico.
I agree.
I think they're a little under the radar. I think
I think so.
They get slept on a little bit. I think people they're starting to gain some momentum. I think people are starting to see the quality that comes out of there. But I don't think, when you think coffee, you don't think Mexico. And they're starting to do some cool stuff in Mexico.
Well, I think you say Mexico, it'd be probably the same as someone else saying America, right? I mean, I don't see us like growing our own beans either.
No, but we do.
I know, but we don't think about, okay, where's your beans come from? Your coffee comes from? No.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't think about America for coffee.
No, I guess before we started on this whole journey, back in the day when you were just drinking regular Folgers or Maxwell House.
Columbia.
Exactly.
I was looking for Columbia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone was.
Yeah,
right?
because that was
it'd be the guy,
commercials I saw.
It'd be the guy with his little donkey.
That's right.
Yep.
His sack of coffee.
Yep.
Coming down the mountain.
Yep. No one would think the States or Mexico or Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very
true. One of the cards.
Yep.
So Honduras.
Honduras is very good.
Yep. Nicaragua.
Colombia is still very good. You can get quality coffee from Colombia.
One of the first Colombia coffees I had from District reminded me of red wine.
Oh, yeah. And District, just so you know, is a coffee roaster here in Houston area. We're in Houston.
Yep.
I think Nicaragua is a great one, too. I think El Salvador makes some good coffee.
They do.
Obviously, any country in Africa. I mean, you can get over to a lot of the different countries. Those are, to me, I find them a little harder to find. Ethiopia, I can find pretty regularly. Kenya, we had some Kenya earlier this morning. Right. Makes some great coffee. If you can get coffee from Yemen, places like that, you can find some great coffee. These are places that produce really good coffee. But then roasting matters. And that's, those beans typically come over here to us green. I say us, the roasters, and then they do their magic of kind of like a winemaker, right? Kind of like a master distiller of making sure they get that bean to a point where, as a coffee drinker, we're going to get the best expression of the coffee from that bean.
Or do you want to take it one step, prior to actually roasting and talk about the processing of the bean itself?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah,
because the two main ones are washed and natural process.
And natural. You want to talk about what those are?
Yeah, so usually, when they pick the cherries off the plant, they obviously they need to get the seeds from inside that cherry. And usually there's two processes, either washed or natural. Natural, you're basically letting these fruit lay out in the sun and rot.
Yeah, you pull the seeds out, but it still has that pulp and everything
Correct.
around it, and you just put it out on a big, call it a sheet, and let the sun do its thing.
Yep.
Nature
Just
take its
ferment,
course.
rot, and let it dry out just all via the sun. While washing is the more mechanical, industrial process of shucking it and washing it and letting it dry with like a dryer.
Yeah, so if you think about in the whiskey world, for those who listen to some of our whiskey shows, chill filtered versus non-chill filtered, kind of like that. We're stripping away some, where the wash process is actually stripping away a little bit of, what could be some character or some flavor, some fun stuff about that coffee.
Which it's true. Granted, neither one. I mean, it's hard to say which one's better, but you can tell differences.
Absolutely.
You have the same two beans. One could be naturally processed, or one could be washed. The natural process could be more fruity, while the other one can be more of a cleaner cup.
Yeah, I agree. And what we're drinking, we got some coffee in the cup.
Mm-hmm.
We're drinking a little something from Ethiopia, from Bombay Abore. The region there is Sidama Orade, and this is a natural coffee that's made. And knowing Ethiopia, the country, if you can get the region it's from, that's great. You don't always get the region, but if you can get the process, knowing if it's natural or washed, it's not like a huge thing unless you're a nerd like us, because then you can start to understand. And what we do, Chris, we look for, can I find this same coffee
And the other variant.
in the other process, washed versus natural, and then maybe do a little
Side by
side.
side, exactly.
And we actually, you and I were talking about this. We found another coffee roaster that we like here in town, has this exact same coffee from the same region, but that was a washed process where this one's natural. So we may have to get a bag of that and
Do a comparison.
a little comparison.
Yep.
That would be a lot of fun. So, yeah, I think you're exactly right to bring that up. Natural versus wash is important to understand and know if you're going to get into the world of coffee.
Correct. And then from there, that's when you get the green beans.
Yep.
Then need to go to a roaster.
Yeah.
So
And roasting, there's this perception with new coffee people, darker's better. I mean, come on.
actually, one thing I learned early on when I first started getting into it was darker has less caffeine usually than lighter roasts.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought it had more.
Exactly.
It doesn't.
Yep.
Because you're cooking it out of it.
Yep.
Yeah. And you're also, cooking. I mean, the easy.
You're burning it.
Huh?
You're burning it.
Yeah. I was going to say the easy analogy would be like, cook a steak to leather and then tell me how that tastes versus a medium rare steak that's juicy and tender and you're losing all that flavor.
And I guess, like each origin bean, an Ethiopian bean probably could have a better flavor profile at a lighter roast than it does at a darker roast. And like some from Kenya could be the opposite.
Well, and the same thing we're talking about, when you get to, it's the seed of a fruit. So the seed of the fruit, because it is fruit, is going to have a fruity kind of characteristic to it. And so you don't want to cook that out of it like we're talking about. So I like that. I like, because for the longest time, I mentioned talking coffee that I used to drink. It was so dark and bitter, and, you had to put a little something in there to cut through that bitterness. But when you get coffees like this, we're drinking it black right now. Yep. It is fruity.
It is.
This is a very fruity coffee.
And eventually, if people out there, you do get into coffee, certain origin beans, especially beans, different countries have different characteristics. Like for me, Ethiopia is more fruity. Sometimes it can be funky meaning more like tropical fruit. But other origins could be more chocolatey or honey or molasses. Yeah,
absolutely. One thing I do want to mention too, if you listen to this show and you've heard us talk a lot of stuff about wine, when we talk about wine and we talk about the fruit, the grapes, where they're harvested, elevation matters. Same with coffee.
Yep.
Getting higher elevation coffee gives you some really fun coffees as well. So it's one of the things that got me down the rabbit hole is just the parallels between coffee and wine. There's, some people might be going, what? But there really are a lot of similar parallels from coffee to wine, especially when you start talking about acid. I mean, wine is, you got to have good acidity in wine for it to be good wine. And I think coffee is very important to have a good acidity, a balance still. We always talk about balancing it in wine with the alcohol, with the fruit, with same thing in coffee. It's got to be balanced.
All right, I agree. But it's almost like with any kind of, plant, right? I mean, elevation matters, soil matters, irrigation matters.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the whole pepper kind of stuff. I mean, different elevations also can make peppers hotter or milder.
Yeah.
So different soil, the same.
It's funny how all these things kind of are very, very similar.
It's natural processes, right?
Natural process, yeah. Well, when we talk about roasters and you hear us say, always get the whole bean and then get a good grinder, there's a couple of reasons that's important. One, the bean being whole, it has less surface area being touched by oxygen, so it's not going to go bad as quickly. But to me, that's important. But the bigger reason for me is, man, I want to control the grind size. I want to play with this coffee, what we call in the coffee world, dial it in, so to speak. Where's my sweet spot for getting and it could be different. What I dial in this coffee to be for me, you might go, no, I want a little more coarse or I want a little finer or whatever. Everybody's different. That's where making coffee at home is really, really nice.
Well, it also depends on what method of brewing you're using. A Chemex is going to needs a different, grind size than a AeroPress.
That's exactly right. Brewer matters.
It's all about the surface area of the coffee grinds. How much water is going to touch those
for
grinds?
Extraction.
Exactly.
We're trying to extract flavor.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about the science of making coffee.
Yeah.
So we talked about the coffee. We talked about grind size, and that varies. There is no, well, what's the general answer? Where should I start? There's really no. I don't think. I guess you could look up, depending on the brewer that you're using, and the roast level on your coffee, and there's probably some guide for each brewer that says you should start in this range and then adjust accordingly to your palate.
Right.
But other than that, there's no really rule. There's no hard fast. You can, and I think the reason they give you that guideline is they don't want you wasting coffee beans, right? You want to get into a spot where it may not be the sweet spot, but you can still drink it. And then that next time you make another cup, you kind of dial it in a little bit more. You're not dumping coffee, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah. Because coffee, let's talk about that. That's something we probably ought to back up and talk about. Price for a bag of beans. Because you're getting a 12 ounce, not even a pound of coffee, less than a pound, and we're paying Chris on average.
It could be $15 to $30 a bag.
Yeah.
On average.
And people are going, what?
Yeah.
$15 to $30? Yeah.
Yep. I mean, again, it all depends on the origin and how it's processed too.
Yeah. But I would say, if you're not getting a single origin coffee, if you're just getting, a good coffee from, Ethiopia or Colombia, Uruguay, wherever it might be, you should be able to be in that $14 to $17 range for a bag of coffee, 12 ounces of coffee. And I'm trying to remember, what do you get, about 15 cups out of that? If you do like a 1 to 15 ratio?
Could be more.
Could be more?
Yeah.
Trying to do quick math, Chris.
I mean, if I drink 2 cups a day, that bag will probably last me 2/3 of a month.
Okay. It lasts you that long.
But at least with an AeroPress.
Okay, so 12 ounces is 341 grams. So if you had 341 grams, and I make a cup every day at 27, so I get 400.
Oh, see, I use 12 grams per cup.
Oh, you use 12. You're doing smaller. Okay.
But I'm also doing the AeroPress. To me, it's more concentrated.
Well, yeah, you are an AeroPress, so yeah. But for me, that still gets me 13 cups of coffee. So if you take, let's just call it $18 divided by 13, I'm paying $1.38 for a badass cup of coffee. If right now you're stopping by Starbucks or some coffee shop every day, guarantee you're paying $5 to $6 for that probably, 12-ounce cup of coffee that you're getting?
If not more, depending on...
Yeah, so I'm at $1.38, and you're going to be at $6.
Yep.
So, I mean... I understand the shock when you hear the cost of a bag of coffee could be $17, $18, $19, but when you back into what it's costing you per cup, it's a great value.
It is.
For the quality of coffee you're getting at home, it's a no-brainer to do it that way if you're into coffee.
Sure, there's a little, to break into it, right? You still have the cost of a brewer and the pot to
there's
boil
an
the water.
investment,
Exactly.
and there's a little while before you get that return back, but it's not long.
No, and like I said earlier, it's part of the fun of learning.
Yeah, I would say, and that's a good point to bring up, Chris, if we're going to talk about the investment to be able to make a good cup of coffee at home. The biggest investment you're going to have is the grinder.
Yep.
And if, grinders are coming down in price a lot. I mean, you can get the what is it, the Barada from, I think it's from Breville.
I believe it's Breville.
I think it's like $100.
That's not bad at all.
And it's conical burr, $120 somewhere in there. Not bad. We haven't talked about travel coffee yet, but if you're somebody who wants to get into coffee and you travel a lot, hand grinder might be the better way to go to start, because being able to take coffee with you, that's important to me now, Chris, is being able to take coffee with me on the road. Good coffee. But the grinder would be the most important thing. After that, it's not super expensive. You can get a cheap kettle for a few bucks.
I think you and I have the same kettle and the same scale.
Yeah, and a scale. You don't have to pay a lot for a scale.
No, you get them off Amazon for both probably $50.
Yeah, and a V60 coffee brewer, if you're going to do a pour over, cost you $12-14 on Amazon. So you're all in. I mean, you can get a nice scale, a nice gooseneck kettle. You can get all that less than $200, and you're in.
Exactly.
And when we're talking about you're saving $5 per cup of coffee that you're getting, and if you do that 5 times during the course of a week, and I'm not even counting Saturday and Sunday, which I'm betting you're still drinking coffee.
Guaranteed.
But let's just say you're $35 a week you're saving. You're talking times 4 in 2 months. You've made your money back.
True.
So it's really not. It's what I would call a good investment.
I agree. And again,
if you're into coffee,
and you're learning something, right? It's more about exploration too.
Well, yeah, that, and I think the learning, but I think the enjoyment of the cup of coffee. One, we all like things that we make better. I think anyway. If you make a badass dinner, you enjoy it because you're like, damn, that's good. And you tell your friends, I made this badass meal the other night, man. It was awesome. Same with coffee or anything, right? If you make a great cup of coffee, there's just something to enjoy in that more.
Well, like you had mission dinners. I mean, you go out to a restaurant, you're going to pay 3 times the price for something you cook at home. Same with coffee.
Yeah, let's not even get started on steaks.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I usually make a better steak now than I can get at most steakhouses.
The problem I have with cooking at home for friends is none of these bastards are tipping me.
That's another episode.
Everybody in today's America gets tipped for nothing. Why aren't I?
Another episode.
Oh, okay. We'll talk about that later.
Next time.
Coming soon, the tipping episode. Yeah. Way overdue.
I agree.
Yeah. So coffee beans, we kind of got off, but then having the grinder, the scale, everything, $200, you're in it. And then we get into the process of making coffee. And we talked a little bit about the brewer. I just mentioned the V60. You can get expensive brewers. You mentioned the Chemex, which is a cool brewer. Mm-hmm. Been around a long time. If you ever watch Friends.
Early 80s, right?
40s.
40s. Oh, so it's been around.
40s. Going on 100 years, in another decade or so. If you ever watch Friends, look on the back, in the kitchen there at Monica's apartment. And
I think you're right. There's Chemex in the background.
There's a Chemex on the counter in a lot of the shots. Not all of them, but just kind of keep an eye out. You'll see it there. But there's 2 different kind of, when you make coffee at home, there's the pour over, which is what you heard me talk about, the V60. You mentioned AeroPress, which is an immersion brewer. So if you think about, people go, well, what do you mean? Well, if you think
French press.
There you go. If you think about the French press, which can be messy and still kind of a cool process, it's just the cleanup of a French press can be a mess.
I agree.
Brewers like the AeroPress. Brewers like the Clever. Give you that same immersion brewing without the mess of a French press, and gives you a great cup of coffee. So you want to tell the folks the difference between, they know what a pour over is, you're pouring it, but talk about the method of a pour over, kind of what you do to make a good cup of coffee there versus the immersion, what you have to do there. Why you might do one over the other.
So with the pour over, it's actively, the water's actively trickling down as you pour it. There's different phases. I think Robert can get into it better than I can, but there's usually, what was the first one, the bloom phase?
The bloom,
where really you're trying to degas some of the CO2.
Yep.
Correct. And then what's the second phase, Rob?
I do a second bloom.
Okay.
And again, that's when you do that first bloom, you're going to see it kind of bubble up and get brown. And typically what I do is 30 seconds to a minute. I'm usually more on the minute side for that first bloom. And you go, okay, well, how much do you put in? If you're going to do at least 2 to 3 times the amount of coffee that you're putting in. So if you're doing, let's just say a 30-gram dose of coffee, I'm going to do between 80 and 90 grams of water on that first bloom. And it's going to bloom up. We call it a bloom because it really balloons up. It looks like a little mushroom or whatever.
Almost looks like it's starting to boil, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't boil. It looks like coffee ground still. Yeah. It just puffs up real big. And that's where the coffee is just enough water where it's getting into the coffee, but it hasn't popped yet.
It's like a pre-soak.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to describe it. And then you do that second bloom, and that's where you see all this light-colored brown. If you think about espresso, and you see that crema, it's that on top of this coffee because that now is that CO2 kind of getting released. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the final time is just you're really just trying to pour water as fast as it can drain, correct?
Yeah, you don't want the coffee to become dry.
Right.
And gosh, man, there are so many different methods and recipes. Some people will break it down into 5 pours, and this much each time watching it. Some of them will say make a bigger pour and you only do it 3 times. It's going to extract differently. Water temperature matters. Are you at 200, 190, 205, just under boiling at 212? But again, this is what makes coffee fun.
Personal preference.
Personal preference. And just the, like you and I'll do. We'll come over here this morning and brew a couple different ways and a couple different brewers and see what you like. It can be the same coffee out of 2 different brewers and you get different kind of profile on that coffee.
Yep.
Which is cool.
Same with the AeroPress, because to me the AeroPress is even more concentrated.
It is for the one you have.
Correct. Well, that's because the water stays in there longer. Has more contact time with the grounds.
Yeah, and what you want to do there is you're going to make a bigger grind.
Correct.
Because you don't want it to be over extracted unless you're just going to add water. Then if you're going to go, because it's a smaller dose, you can't. You have the original AeroPress.
I do.
So it's typically what 20 is the max.
For grams of coffee?
Mm-hmm.
I usually do 12.
Okay.
Per cup.
So
12 grams of coffee grinds to around 200 grams of water.
Yep. So you can tell it's a smaller, those listening, that's a smaller cup of coffee. But it's also kind of fun because, you're not pouring a 16-ounce cup of coffee where you can go through. If you have, you talk to me and Chris, we always have 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 bags of coffee underneath the coffee bar.
I do.
And so being able to drink 3 cups in the morning that are just different coffees, different brewers is also, this is so nerdy.
It is.
But it's part of the fun for us coffee.
But nerds. Also with my AeroPress, there's third-party companies that make different accessories for it. So instead of my little paper filters, I have like an espresso style bottom where it has a stainless steel mesh frame, really fine mesh frame that actually makes it have more pressure.
Yep.
That actually, to me, makes it more concentrated.
Okay. More concentrated. I wouldn't have thought that. Because what? When you're pushing, because this is a plunger. People who don't know what an AeroPress is, it's kind of the cylinder that has the bottom where you put the filter that you're talking about where the coffee will actually come through. Usually you have a paper filter. The grounds will go on top. You'll wet it. You'll put it over a cup first, and it will slowly leak out, not a lot, until you plunge. Right. A lot of people will do the inverted method where they'll pull the plunger just back, put the coffee that way, so there is no leakage, that you get more extraction, more flavor from the coffee. But then you have to flip it over real quick and be careful, not spill, and then do your plunge.
See, this one I don't have to.
Me neither. So I wonder if you have the same one I have. I bought it from Fellow.
I think it's the same
and
one.
And it works on there. I still put a paper...
I don't. I just find stainless steel.
Stainless steel? Yeah. It's a great way to do it. One thing I do like about AeroPress, for the longest time, they've been out for, 30 years now? Something like that?
90s,
25 years? Something like that?
It was made by an engineer, like an aerospace engineer.
Yeah. He, for the longest time, just made the AeroPress. And then they made the AeroPress Go, which I have, which gives you a cup and all this other stuff that you can do. But now they've gotten to, they're listening to their customers. People wanted the same brewer, but bigger. And I recently purchased the AeroPress XL, which now you can get 40 grams of coffee in this thing with 600 grams of water. I mean, I can make coffee for 3 people in one brew.
Yep.
And, you know, I did a video on my YouTube channel where I talked about travel coffee. And to me, I see a lot of people do travel coffee, and everything's always about being compact and getting everything into a small space. And I go, well, that's true if you're flying. I get, you know, space is, you know, a premium on a flight when you're, you know, in your suitcase. But if I'm driving, now the game's changed. You know, you can always make room in your car for a little bit. Yeah, for maybe 2 bags of coffee or 3 bags of coffee if you're going to a friend's house or a family member where you know you're going to want some good coffee. So to me, I always try to, when I'm driving somewhere, I'm taking maybe 2 brewers. I'm taking, you know, my big hand grinder and stuff. But to me, travel coffee is different depending on your mode of transportation to get where you're going and where you're going. Because, Chris, when we go see our friends now and stuff, and they drink coffee, but they're not into coffee, but they see our coffee bars and go,
they get interested. They ask questions.
And they go, can you make me one?
Yep.
You know, I had a little dinner here last night, and a buddy of mine was like, we finished up dinner. We did a little white wine blind and some fish tacos. And my buddy looked over and goes, what about coffee? Can you make some coffee? You know, people come over for dinner, they see a coffee bar. At the end of the night, they're like, how about a coffee?
They get curious.
Yeah.
They get curious.
So we become the coffee guys, just like you might be the whiskey guy or the wine guy. And it's kind of cool to expose people to that. I love to share coffee, just like food, wine, whiskey, all that stuff. Yep. So sharing coffee is no different. I like people to
What's a good conversation starter?
It is. Because most people, when they go, well, do you have cream and sugar? No. Well, I can't have anything. I don't like black coffee. You haven't had this coffee.
Try it.
Yes.
Let's try it.
And I can't tell you the number of people I've had go, okay, I could drink that. Exactly. That's what coffee should be.
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree.
Brewers. I'm a big fan of the V60. I mean, Chris, look, over there, I have like 12 different kind of brewers.
You do.
Yeah. But V60, the Clever French Press, the Origami's a cool one. The Kalita Wave 185 is a good one. Chemex. There's all kind of brewers out there. You only need one, but I guarantee you, if you go down this rabbit hole, you're going to have more than one.
Like I said earlier, experimentation. But like, what would your first one be if you had to start over again? What would be your if you had to introduce a friend who would ask
V60.
You exactly? Oh,
always V60 because one, it's a great brewer. And let me tell you, when you if you decide that you're going to look for a V60 online, there's 2 different versions they have: a ceramic one that's like $25, and a plastic one that's like $14 Get the plastic.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that just because it's less expensive. That's part of it, but the bigger reason is that you want to be able to your brewer. When you pre-wet your filter that's inside the V60. You want the brewer to warm up so that when you put the coffee in, it starts to activate. It doesn't cool back down the water. The plastic heats up really quick and will hold its heat a lot better. It takes a long time for that ceramic one to warm up. It was the first one I bought because I was like, well, I'm getting ceramic. That's got to be better.
Exactly.
It's not better. The plastic one's actually better. And if you're just against plastic, then don't get it. But it's worth getting for sure.
Agree. No, I agree. That should be the first one.
Yeah.
V60.
After that, it's just exploration. You know, I'd say go to coffee shops that are doing it with the different brewers, whether it's Origami or a Kalita Wave or a Chemex, and then just see what kind of hits you and buy a couple other ones because I don't think there's any way you're going to get into coffee and have one brewer.
No. I think I have 4 at home.
Yeah.
Just random ones.
Travel one's going to be a big one. Yep. Definitely have to have a travel brewer, I think.
Most likely an AeroPress.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there's other brewers out there. If there are, I don't know what they are, Chris. Yeah, I don't know if there's other travel brewers out there. I don't know what they are. They sure don't get the love. The only one I know that gets that much love is the AeroPress.
I agree, and I think rightfully so. Though I mean, when I've traveled, I've carried it with me.
Well, and you know, we're saying travel like you're going out of town or out of state.
You go to your friend's house.
We can call it on the go. Yeah, to a friend's house. I know a lot of people that, you know, will have a brewer at home so they can make coffee. But when they don't have time, they leave the AeroPress at their place of employment. So when they get to work, they have a little bag of coffee. They have a little hand grinder that, you know, if you have a hand grinder for travel, you leave it at your office when you're not traveling. So if you need to make a cup at the office, you can use your regular machine grinder at home. I mean, these are ways so if, hey, I don't have time to make a cup, I'll make it at the office. You can get in there, grind it real quick, put it in the AeroPress, and everybody in your office is going to be jealous because they're drinking community coffee and you got some badass. Yeah. K-Cups.
That's
The
true.
worst coffee you can get.
Yep.
If you didn't know, now you know.
Yep. Chemicals, plastic, everything.
Oh, it's absolutely the worst coffee you can get. The best kind of cup coffee is the Nespresso.
Yep,
Just
I agree.
in case you're looking for something that's easy and convenient. You go, I don't want to grind and make. If you're looking to just get a little bit better in your coffee game, Nespresso would be the way to go.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
But no, I think the last time I took my AeroPress anywhere was when I went camping in Big Bend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was perfect. Waking up in the morning, it was probably, literally freezing outside, 30 degrees.
Yeah.
I made a fresh cup of hot coffee and got to see the scenery.
Yeah, it's not hard to do. And I was starting to mention that, traveling out of town, out of state, but just, hey, I'm going to get up early and go on a hike. And I'm going to go up down this trail in the woods or up on the hill or mountain or whatever. And when I get up there, I'm going to sit down, relax, and have a cup of coffee. Yep. And you can take a thermos of hot water, and you can take your grinder, your little hand grinder, your coffee, and your AeroPress, and get up to a place and make a great cup of coffee.
And enjoy the
You think about
nature.
that thermos, the cap is always the cup.
Exactly.
So
you get to enjoy nature.
it's not that much to get into it.
No.
Just a few pieces of equipment, the most expensive being the grinder, the most important being the grinder. If you look online and you go, hey, I can find one for $40, the biggest thing is a lot of these might have plastic burrs. You don't want those. You got to make it. To me, the floor for a good grinder would probably be between $90 and $100. I think you can get the what's the one? I know you can get the 1Z Presso Q2S for right at $95, and the Time More 3 I think is about $75. So $80 to $100 you can get a good grinder. That's really a good starting point.
And that's the main one. That's the main thing you need.
And if you're like, man, I've got the fundage and I want to go a little better and I'm going to do a lot of pour over, then you can go up into something like a fellow O2 or the Barada or something like that, where you have to be careful if you start spending money on a grinder is to really figure out what you're going to do in coffee. We're talking just kind of pour over coffee, immersion coffees today. If you're ever thinking you want to get into espresso, then you need to rethink about, because I have two grinders, one for espresso and one for pour over, and yeah, you can get down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, another rabbit hole.
Another rabbit hole. Chris, a lot of fun having this talk to you.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
And while we did it, we had a good cup of coffee.
Yep, about to pour a little more.
About to pour a little more. I'm with you, man. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Oh, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of. I'm gonna try that again, Chris. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.